My name's Dave Rothan. Just for those that don't know me, that's Frank Danone back there. We're the ones putting on the presentation today. Of course, today is on the Incorruptibles. I wanted to go over, start with a prayer for Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Lord, I want to thank you for the incredible miracle and the gift of the Incorruptibles. It's marvelous the way you show us how you bless those that do your will. And we'll say, Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Okay, so we started. This is, of course, our series on science, test, faith. We started with, on December 3rd, the Star of Bethlehem. We do have about 5 more of those videos available for $10 if you want to purchase them today. We did on December 10th, we did Our Lady of Guadalupe. We are having DVDs made of that. They'll be available before the end of the series. So, and then we'll probably have them available up at church. Those are going to be at $5 each, just at cost. Next week is Science, Test, Faith. That's it's about an hour and 50 minutes, but it's really well done. They go through 2 miracles of the Eucharist. The Catholic Church actually allowed the scientists to take portions of the miracles of the Eucharist. They're about 1,200 years apart. And they did scientific research, studies, histology, and everything, and the results are really amazing. I won't ruin it for you. But it's really neat. That was next week. Like I said, it's an hour and 50 minutes, but you won't be bored. Then on January 28th, we're doing the Shroud of Turin and the Burial Cloths of Christ. So that's our final one. We're going to be having all those on DVD available. So let's start with the Incorruptibles. For God created us for incorruption and made us in the image of His own eternity. That's Wisdom 2:23. Now, before we talk about the Incorruptibles, in order to give you a real appreciation for what's going on here, we need to talk a little bit about stages of human decomposition. It's a little bit on the grody side, but it will give you a real appreciation for it. Society today really doesn't really get it like they did, even 20, 30, 40 years ago. So we'll go over that first. This one's on with non-embalmed people first, okay, and then we'll talk about embalmed. So the first 24 to 72 hours, there's very little observable change. The underside of the body begins to discolor, and rigor mortis locks tendons and muscles in place. And then the next one, between 4 and 10 days after death, gases bloat the internal organs, bloating of the face, and then my favorite, the greenish hue of the skin is discolored. So and that's between 4 and 10 days. We're already starting to get, looking pretty bad. If you remember in one of the gospel readings with Lazarus, when Lazarus died, he was in the tomb for 4 days. And they're like going, you don't want to go in. And so, by 4 days, it's getting pretty bad, okay? 10 to 25 days after death, active decay phase of decomposition process starts. The skin blackens, and most of the liquid leaves the body. Now, this is real important there's a couple of the saints that were incorruptible. Before they buried them, they had them out on display for the public to come view them. And I don't remember the name of one of them. They had laying out for people to view for 19 days. 19 days. And, you know, they didn't have any problems with smell, you know, the whole 9 yards, you know. So after I was looking at this, I was like, whoa, that one was 19 days. They would have been pretty grody by then, you know. So that just, you know, goes to show you. Now the stages of, with 25 to 50 days after death, the final breakdown of soft tissues and skin and hair, and then the bones are exposed. And then 50 days after death, the body remains, this is with embalming, so that was without embalming is what that now. With embalming, 50 days after death, the body still remains identifiable for months. But within 1 year, usually all that's left is the skeleton and teeth. So even with embalming, after a year, you're left with a skeleton. Okay. So now that we have a concept of that decay process, and then it takes 5 to 50 years for the bones to become dry and brittle. So now with that, then we'll talk about what are the incorruptibles. They're the bodies of the saints that did not undergo any decomposition after death. Many remaining fresh, flexible years after, or even centuries after their death. You know, basically with pretty much all of them that I was reading about had these common characteristics. They look like they just died. They can take and move their arms, their legs, and everything, and perfectly flexible, even hundreds of years later. And most of them, pretty much almost all of them, had like a fresh fragrance. And the whole fragrance thing was interesting because they'd have their clothing, like hundreds of years after their death, their clothing would still have a perfume smell to it. They had some of them where even around the building where they were, what they're in when they passed away, or when they're just exposed, people would walk by and could smell it. So it's real interesting, the whole fragrance thing. And when they find, if they'd exhume them, there would be no smell, and they'd have this sweet fragrance. That's pretty interesting there. How many incorruptibles are there? There's over 200 confirmed, existing only since early Christian days. The earliest incorruptible is 170 AD. Now, one of the things, not a lot, some of the incorruptibles have been destroyed over the years. They'd have hundreds of years of, writings about them and people venerating them and stuff, but with wars and stuff, they would actually, the invading armies would destroy a lot of the incorruptibles. So that's part of, they want to get rid of the evidence, or what would increase faith for people, But this is St. Sylvan, died 350 AD. Greater majority were never embalmed or treated in any manner. Most were found lifelike, flexible, and sweet-smelling even after the passage of centuries. Now, for disclosure purposes, St. Bernadette of Lourdes, this picture here, it's a little deceiving because they have a very thin wax mask over. We just found this out not too long ago before we could change it. But they found that her nose was collapsing a little bit and her eyes were sinking a little bit, so they did the wax mask. So this is a little deceiving here, so we wanted to be straight up with you on that. The coffins and clothing rotted away, but the bodies were preserved. They had, which is incredible, is their coffin would be totally rotted around them, their clothes would be rotted off them. They cleaned them up, put them in new clothes. They looked like they just died. When you really think of it, being buried 6 foot underground in a coffin, the coffin decays, all the soil, just them being smashed by the weight of the soil, just that not even happening is incredible in of itself. But yeah, having everything right away. Some of the incorruptibles were in such a atmosphere when they were buried that was really super moist. Like, I mean, they had times when some of them were, they had flooding, and the incorruptible, their casket would float up to the top, and they were just drenched in water, and they're perfectly preserved. So it's really quite amazing. But also, one of the weird things in the Catholic Church, which I think is kind of weird anyway, is they would take relics from the saints. Usually they would, after they were buried for a while, they'd uncover them and then take their bones and put them in the altars, which is a little strange if you ask me. But that's what the common practice was, and that's why a lot of these incorruptibles were found incorrupt, because they're exhuming their bodies to take their bones to put in altars to make them more holy. So, but they'd actually take lime, which tends to cause the decay process to go quicker, and they'd actually cover them with lime so that the decay process would happen quicker, so they can get the bones and put them in the altar. And even with all that, the bodies remain incorrupt. Most were examined by medical professionals and reported miraculous preservations that cannot be explained. Of course, these are professionals of the time. Of course, we added a section on this we're going to talk about tonight is the modern incorruptibles with Padre Pio, and that still holds true as far as even today they can't explain it. Their skin's soft. Most of the time, most of them, you can compress the skin. It's soft, movable. There's a few of them that they turn a little gray, a little chalky, but the large majority of them are, the skin is soft, compressible and stuff. Their skin maintains its natural look, but in some cases it's turned slightly gray. So you'll see that we'll have a series of pictures here coming up that will show you there's some of them that are gray. Upright. So we're going to use some video here real quick. pretty incredible. Yeah, personally, I'm amazed as far as, you know, I have never even heard of an Incorruptibles till maybe a year or two ago. And if you ask me, this is the Catholic Church's great treasure that can increase people's faith massively. I mean, this is something that every Catholic should know about and be well known about it and the details of it. I mean, it's such a neat treasure, and the Catholic Church doesn't, talk about it, or even when you have days, Lives of the Saints, when you look at their daily stuff, they never say anything about them being incorruptible, and it's really kind of sad. And well, that's why we're here. But so it's great. So now we're going to get on the less common characteristics, some of the more unique stories and different things with some of them. Some of them, their body emits clear oils. Quite a few of them had, at their death, they'd have an oil form on their forehead, and people would come and take cloth and wipe it on there, and then the claws would be attributed to all kinds of miracles and everything. And quite a bit of oils. The clothing did not decay with time on some of them, so most of them, the clothes and the coffins decayed, but on some of them, their clothes didn't decay either. The body emits blood. There's actually two different examples of that. St. Nicholas and then St. John of the Cross. St. Nicholas, 40 years after his death, his arms were amputated and fresh blood poured forth. Actually, somebody got into where his incorrupt body was and were cutting his arms off for relics for himself. And then they started bleeding all over, and he got scared and took off. So, very strange. But, I think that would scare me off too. And in the first century, after amputation, the arms were found imbued with blood, although the body of the saint had decomposed. So the arms remained incorrupt, but his body ended up decaying. And then toward the end of the 15th century, fresh blood spilled from the arms. So that was, 200 years later. Spilled from the arms, an occurrence which repeated over 20 times. And then in 1699, so another, 400 years after his death, the flow of blood began on May 29th and continued until September. This is all documented, well documented. It's not just hearsay. And then St. John of the Cross, 1542 to 1591, 18 months after his death, he was found incorrupt, his body fresh and supple, fragrant perfume emitting from his body, like pretty much all of them. His finger was removed as proof, and blood spilled from it. They're going to exhume him, take the bones, and put him in altars. He was sent by the queen, and when they found his body incorrupt, they had to bring proof to the queen that he was incorrupt, so they cut his finger off, and blood came out. So, pretty odd times back then. Body exhumed and examined 4 times since his death. The last time was in 1955. 364 years after his death, he was slightly discolored, but most moist and flexible. And then another unusual event, Heavenly Voice, Blessed Cecilia, 1847 to 1870. Her voice had been heard for the past 100 years, accompanying the sisters with hymns and religious readings and in conversation. Also heard accompanying the priest during celebration of the Mass and sermons. And then another very unique one was an imprinted heart. St. Clare, 1268 to 1308, she said when she was alive, "If you seek the cross of Christ, take my heart, there you will find the suffering Lord." Imprinted on her heart After her death, her heart was found incorrupt and imprinted with symbols of the Lord's passion. There's a crucifix, which was the size of a thumb, the body of Christ visible with his head inclined to the right, a livid red mark on its side, white tissue serves as a loincloth. There is a sponge that was a single nerve resembling a reed with a tiny cluster of nerve endings forming the sponge. There's 3 pellets, now this is really unique, found in the gall of the heart. They are the size of hazelnuts. They are symbolizing the Trinity. All were found to be of equal weight, but any one of the pellets was found to be equal in weight to all 3 together.
Wow.
Okay. That's pretty incredible.
I don't understand.
Other symbols that were found was the column with the tongues and a rope, a crown of thorns, 3 nails, and a lance. And all still visible after 600 years. Movement and manna. St. Agnes, 1268 to 317, she was found incorrupt several years after her death. Now, the future Saint Catherine of Siena visited her shrine. And she visited 2 times. At the first visit, she knelt to kiss the foot of the incorrupt St. Agnes, and the foot rose up to meet her lips in front of a whole assembly of people. So this is all well documented too. So on the second visit, St. Catherine decided not to have a repeat performance and go to the head. Okay? But on that one, a very fine white manna fell and covered Agnes, Catherine, and the whole assembly. So much fell that all could fill their hands with it. And then when she was alive, when she would go into ecstasies, the manna would fall on her, but they were little tiny crosses. So that the manna that fell when she was incorrupt was not little crosses, but when she was in ecstasy, she was known to have the manna fall in little crosses. The stigmata, St. Catherine of Siena had the stigmata. City bells rang on their own. There's 3 different examples of that. Most of them were when they, found the incorrupt body. When they, uncovered them, they would clean them up and they would create a place in the church for them, and then they'd have a procession taking them from where they had them to their new spot, and the city bells would ring by themselves. So there's 3 different examples of that. Different times, but that gives you the general idea. Eyes opened in perfumed moisture. With St. Paschal, he had a very deep devotion to the Eucharist, and that's what he spent his whole priesthood is, talking about the Eucharist and being the body of Christ and everything. So, at the time of his death, sweet smelling moisture collected on his forehead. It flowed copiously and continuously for 3 days. Devotees collected samples on small cloths. Miraculous cures attributed to the cloths that were stained with this moisture. Mourners tested the flexibility of the body. They were allowed to just come up, when he was being viewed, laid out. They let people just move his arms, his legs around, and check it out, check it out, They even did the eyelids were drawn back to show the clarity of the eyes. He was viewed by many, his eyes opened during the elevation of the Eucharist during his funeral mass, and then closed at the second elevation. So the whole church was packed, and many people documented saw his eyes open. Our Lord wished to reward Paschal's extraordinary devotion to the Eucharist that even on the other side of the tomb, he might still have the consolation of adoring him in the Holy Eucharist. So St. Paschal was found incorrupt then after his death, because that was leading up to his death. 18 months after his death, he was found incorrupt. Of course, they were going to get his bones, right? His body was exhumed, again, 19 years after his death, still found to be incorrupt. Doctors declared the manner of preservation supernatural and miraculous. Also, he is known for curious knockings, sometimes called bolts, proceeded from his relics or pictures during the past centuries. And then I'm going to turn it over. Frank did some research on St. Januarius, so he's well versed in this, more than I am. So I'm going to turn it over to him, but we got to do a transfer.
All right, so as Dave said, I'll talk a little bit about St. Januarius, who was a bishop in the 4th century. Now, there's not a lot known about him other than he was martyred under the rule of the Emperor Diocletian in 305 during the persecution of Christians by the Romans. Little else is known about his life or his martyrdom other than he was beheaded. But shortly after his death, his body was transferred to Naples, Italy, where it is currently kept. And this is something that I didn't know. St. Januarius is not incorrupt, but there's another specific miracle with him. And what they did is they kept a vial of his blood, and it's kept in what you see here, and it's exhibited 18 times each year. The Saturdays before the first Sunday in May and the 8 following days. His feast day, which is September 19th, and then the octave after that, and then again on December 16th. And the blood is always exhibited with this silver bust that you see here of St. Januarius that's believed to contain the head of the saint. I couldn't find any more information to know if it really is in there or not, the remains of it, but that's what's believed with that. Now, what's unique about this is there's a miracle of the blood of his. They keep his blood in the vials that you see here, and during most of the times of the year when it's not displayed, it looks like it's dried out blood. But what happens on his feast day is they bring these vials out, and you can see the celebrant here is displaying the blood to the whole congregation that's assembled. Prayers are said by the assembly for the miracle to happen. And what happens is while he's doing this, he takes those vials and starts to rotate them around to see if there's any movement in them. And usually within the hour, the blood liquefies. And here you can see, with it turned upside down, that the blood has moved from the bottom of that vial to the top. So it does show movement in there. It becomes liquid. And on some occasions, it actually bubbles and froths, so it looks like it gains in mass. Which is a miracle in and of itself. And then the celebrant announces very loudly, the miracle is done. And this has happened. And then the vial is brought to the communion rail for the congregation to come up and venerate the blood as it's liquefied. Now, what's interesting about this is it's happened for over 700 years. And until, I think, last year, where I caught a video as I was reading something on the internet where I actually saw the celebration of this happening. So again, it's one of those best kept secrets that Dave was talking about with the Incorruptibles. Now, with anything like this, there's skeptics. And a lot of the skeptics say that from the heat from the lights, the celebrant holding it, and the assembly, how many people? I mean, this is a picture of the assembly that you see in the procession that happens on that day. They say that's what liquefies the blood. But what's great about this miracle is that to avoid the charge of fraud, the civil authorities or the local government won't even let them do the miracle without someone from the church and someone from the government being present. And they actually have professors, noted reputable professors, stand in different places during the miracle and record the temperature of the room to see what's going on. and then they record the temperature and they record the time that it takes for the miracle to happen. And what they found is that over the years, scientific memoirs of 3 different professors that have done this continually show that there's no correlation, no relationship between the temperature and the miracle happening. And there was 2 examples given where the liquefaction of the blood actually was slower at 77 degrees. It took longer for it to happen. And then at 60 degrees Fahrenheit, it happened almost instantaneously. So it just goes in these cycles. So it's just an amazing, amazing thing. And again, it's something that you don't hear much about. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dave to talk about Padre Pio.
Right now, we were bringing up, that topic, and then this Padre Pio. We're bringing this up because a lot of people think, oh, the Incorruptibles was a thing of the past. It was hundreds, thousands of years ago. All this stuff. Where that's why we did the research on this, because the book that we have up here didn't really go into any modern day Incorruptibles. So we wanted to bring it up to show you that this stuff is still happening today, and it's incredible. Okay, so Padre Pio, 1861 to 1968. He's incorruptible and much, much more. He consecrated himself to the Lord at a very early age, and we're talking 5 years old. Padre Pio used to play, like kids play with trucks and stuff. He was playing being priest in the Eucharist and everything. So he was committed from an early age. He had the stigmata for 50 years, which is the palms and the hands and the feet and the side wounds. He lost as much as a cup of blood a day from the wound. And then they said that he never had any issues with low iron count, and just didn't affect him that way. He was very embarrassed by the stigmata. When he first got the stigmata, he asked actually the Lord to take it away because he was getting way too much attention. And he would hide it and stuff, and he finally had to tell his superior. And then the word got out, which he didn't want, and then he was getting all this attention. Well, he just couldn't stand that. So he asked the Lord to take away the stigmata, this outward sign, but he wanted to keep the pain because he wanted to suffer for lost souls and stuff. So he was very, embarrassed and didn't want the attention and everything. So the Lord did take away the stigmata for 1 year, and then they came back again, and then he had them non-stop for 50 years. He had the gift of bilocation. He could be in 2 places at the same time. There's story upon story about this. I can't really get into it right now. If you're really curious, read a book on. There's a lot of books on Padre Pio, but I just wanted to mention it. At times, he could read and speak different languages, even though he only knew Italian. A lot of this was done in the confessional, so he had many gifts that way. He had prophecies of his came true. He could read people's souls in the confessional. He was known to draw stuff out of people and go, you forgot something. And then somebody go, what? I can't think of it. You remember that time in the farm? So he had, there's many stories of him drawing stuff out, and then there's other stories where he would not absolve them from their sins because they weren't sincere, and they wouldn't. He'd try and draw it out of them, and they wouldn't. And he says, "Well, I'm sorry because you're not being sincere." He was a miracle worker before and after his death. And then he had magnificent works of charity. Started hospitals for the poor, and he was an incredible man. I read quite a bit on it, just preparing this little section. He's really incredible. Once he went 20 days living on the Eucharist alone without food or water. Medically speaking, going so long without water is impossible. Dehydration and death would normally ensue. Padre Pia's stigmata. They did some, studied the stigmata. He was actually removed from his priestly duties for a while because there's a lot of allegations that he was a fraud, and which killed him because he loved being in the confessional. He'd spend 10, 12 hours a day in the confessional, and people would wait for days and days and days to go to confession to him. So that killed him not to be able to say Mass and to be in the confessional because people were saying that it was a fraud. So they did the church actually did some studies on the stigmata. They were the signs of the Passion of Christ. They were not open wounds consisting of lesioned tissues. They were actually bloody exudations. That is, bloody matter oozed out of the way of hyperpermeability of the vein walls. So, just kind of oozed through its skin. So it didn't have any puncture wounds or anything. They assumed very precise shapes, but in different positions. And this is real important because, some people say, well, by the power of his mind, he was able to create the stigmata, through mental, telepathy or whatever, But the thing is, they would move around in a little different location on his hand and side and stuff, and it's like near impossible for somebody that could create something using their mind that would be able to, have different, move the location around and stuff like that. So that just just by itself kind of proved it was miraculous. The exudations didn't cause inflammation or suppuration. They claimed this is like the only picture that, and he didn't want the picture taken, but the Catholic Church forced him to get this picture. So as far as his actual stigmata, seeing pictures of it, there's very few of those because he would always hide it and stuff. But everybody was saying that he used carbolic acid to create the stigmata, but if he did that, there would be inflammation, dead tissue, healing, that whole bit, and there wasn't any of that. So it couldn't be self-inflicted, in other words. The sores in coagulated blood emitted a strong scent of violets, not a foul odor as would be expected with bleeding wounds. So this goes into the same category as the incorruptibles, where their bodies didn't smell or anything and actually had a violet scent, etc. He was embarrassed by the outward signs and asked God to remove them, but to continue to give him pain of the wounds. The stigmata disappeared at the end of his life, which had no trace of scars at all. And that's another argument for if it was self-inflicted wound, there would be scars and stuff. Before I do this, the neat thing is that next week we're going to be doing the science test faith, and in that there's actually a lady who they film the stigmata showing up, and it goes right in line with this description as far as just bleeding through the skin kind of thing. So it really goes exactly with this. So on that video, they didn't leave her side, and they showed the stigmata showing up, and the whole thing. So it's really incredible, but it's neat because it correlates exactly with this. So in conclusion, the incorruptible bodies of saints are a consoling sign of Christ's victory over death, the confirmation of the dogma of the resurrection of the body, a sign that the saints are still with us in the mystical body of Christ, as well as proof of the truth of the Catholic faith. For only in the Catholic Church do we find the phenomenon. So, as a tribute to Padre Pio, I'm going to run, it's just about a 2-minute thing on he's being exposed and as far as people going to check it out. So, we're going to do about 2 minutes of that. At the end, I have the books on the Incorruptibles where a lot of this information came. We're selling that for $20. I do have about 5 or 6 of the videos of the Star of Bethlehem available. Those are $10 each. We are going to have the DVDs from the Guadalupe, Our Lady of Guadalupe available. So we'll find a way to, hopefully we'll have them by the end of our last presentation. So next week is the Science Test Faith. That one is 1 hour and 50 minutes, but very good. You don't want to miss that. And then the next week is the Shroud of Turin and the Burial Cross of Christ. Now we do have a replica of the Shroud of Turin. It's 15 foot long and 4 foot wide that we're going to display on the 28th. So we'll play this last video and get it working. Anybody have any questions?
Yes. Why was he exhumed 40 years after his death?
I do not know the answer to those bones. They finally wanted to get his bones. Anybody else, I don't know if I can answer them. But.
Were there any scar tissue from like his feet where he would have been?
With Padre Pio, after he passed away, there was no scars at all left from any of his stigmata, even though he had them for 50 years. They had the side wound would move, up and down on the side of his ribs and stuff too, from a couple different locations. They had a lot of, they had like I don't know, 3 or 4 inquiries where they examined them and they measured stuff and the whole kit and caboodle, which was very disturbing to him. He was like really couldn't stand that, but they compared and none of anything was the same. Emily, you had a question?
That was the same question.
Nice.
Dave, I think somebody told me one time that after somebody is blessed, the church exhumes their body. It's got something to do with the process of becoming a saint. Because
Canonization process.
Blessed Thomas at campus, I think it is,
Okay.
they said that he'll always remain a blessed because of what they found when they exhumed his coffin. And I could have this wrong. I'd have to check the person who told me this, but it was a priest who told me this, that they found that evidently he was still alive when they buried him, and he showed signs of despair when they exhumed his body. So there, he'll never become a saint because they assume that he lost faith.
Wow. Wow.
That's true.
Huh.
See,
Thank you
Frank
for
agrees.
sharing.
Frank read everything.
Any other questions? Well, thanks for coming. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.